as I share my screen, let me introduce myself. My name is Sherry Hartman. I am one of our literacy consultants here at Patton. And tonight, myself, Sherry Hartman, and I'll be joined by a colleague, Sherry Wilson, from the Philadelphia School District. And I'm honored to have her as my co-presenter this evening. She has a nice little resume. She's been at Dunbar Elementary in the Philadelphia School District for the past 7 years, wearing a lot of different hats. She's been an ABA therapist, she's been a TSS worker, and she's been a classroom assistant. And this is her second year as the primary emotional support teacher in, for, what is it, Sherry, a K2 or K3?
K2.
K2 classroom. And so we will be sharing some information on dialogic reading with you. And the way our evening's going to work, is we're going to have like a 15-minute or so mini mini content presentation. And then we'll break up into breakout rooms, and then have you all, hopefully you've brought a text that you can share, a diverse text that you can share with some colleagues. And then we'll have about 30 minutes that we'll be sharing some books that you have implemented in your classroom. And we thought this kind of professional learning community may be really helpful because we know that you all are doing some awesome things in your classrooms, as we get that quick little opportunity every once in a while to pop in and see what's happening. But we thought this would be a nice avenue and venue for you all to share some of the books that you're reading in your classrooms. So without any further ado, we're going to get started. So as you're really thinking about why should you even implement dialogic reading? Well, dialogic reading really works, and it is an evidence-based practice. Children who have been read to dialogically are substantially ahead of children who have been read to traditionally on tests of language development. And children can jump ahead by several months in just a few weeks after implementing a dialogic reading protocol. The research is really clear, and the advantages for implementing dialogic reading, there's advantages for vocabulary development, as well as for oral language, expressive oral language skills. And it also supports that social emotional piece. You know, when students are able to see themselves in books and see kids like them working through some different things, it provides a really nice model as well. So without any further ado, we'll get started. And I'm going to give you a minute or so to read this chat. And as you're reading the chat, as you're reading the quote, what resonates with you? Think about a phrase that kind of speaks to you, or a word that really kind of resonates with you, and then jot that into your chat. And then in a minute, I'll say go, and then we'll do a chat waterfall to see what some of how the quote resonated with everyone. Do you guys need more time? Yeah, no, maybe. Go ahead and type into the chat and go. Right. And some of the comments are some of the ones that I'm sure scaffolding interactions, vocabulary. I see a couple people wrote down vocabulary, experiences, oral complexity, correlates with future literacy skills, oral language development and vocabulary development, scaffolded interactions. Another one, experiences, oral, okay. Language gains. I think I got most of them, but yeah, I mean, dialogic reading is one of those processes that through just some conversation with kids about books around the text that they're reading, it can be a very powerful interaction. And this conversation is really based on asking questions to help children learn new words, build that background knowledge, think about the structure of a text, and look deeper even into the literal meaning and then go back and unpack some of those complexities. So it's scaffolded and tailored to the literacy needs of your students. So thinking about that, dialogic reading is that intervention to promote that emergent literacy and literacy acquisition of young children. Research really shows us that. And the goal of dialogic reading is to make children those active participants in the shared picture book reading rather than passive listeners. And how you do it is by having that adult conversation with the content of those picture books and then elaborating on that. And one of the things that really kind of sticks with me is that it is that explicit, systematic way of incorporating some good children's literature into our classroom instruction, with a purpose. Because as a teacher, I can be listening and pulling some formative assessment data as I think about that top of the rope. What do my kids need? Whoops, wrong way. And we now see, so it is that interactive engaging for all students and for all kinds of literature. One of the neatest things I've seen in a dialogic reading lesson is students who are identified having that collaborative conversation along with their typically age developing peers and contributing to the conversation. It helps to support their growth as well. And then it can give, as a teacher, it can give me an opportunity to expand and extend their knowledge as well. And it's not that teacher focused or a passive activity. But think about how you can use dialogic reading in multiple levels. That first read, within that first level, you're just considering how you might be able to build some background knowledge, identify nouns, think about that setting. Level one, you might be, in that level one, you also might be introducing new vocabulary. For example, if you were looking at an informational text, you might, on animals, you might ask students, what type of feet does this animal have? Looking for the correct response. And if they would just say little feet, you could then expand by asking more questions to give them more information. But you're just really working on that surface level, identifying the basic information about the story. Then those level 2 questions are open-ended and used to solicit feedback. So what's happening in that part of the story? Trying to encourage the child to share what he or she is thinking about and making meaning as you are considering your questions too. And then level 3 questions are more advanced and introduce concepts like text feature and story components. You might ask further ask questions like, who is that main character and how are they feeling? How would you feel if something like that would happen to you? And then really during that, as you're planning the dialogic reading, and we all already did touch on this, but just think about using that top part of the rope. Think about, what do your kids need? Do they need to learn how to how to correctly label nouns? Are they working on some attributes, some functional labels? Are they working on taking turns? Are you working on vocabulary or background knowledge, or vocabulary development? Are you working with just the sentence structure and moving them from using more simple sentences in their expressive vocabulary to more complex or compound sentences? And then I kind of always think of that level 3 as giving you that opportunity to do some of that work around some of the inferencing as well. So really thinking about that top part of the rope and how you can be intentional with giving your kids what they need. So take a look at this chart. And what do you notice? What do you notice? Either share it in the chat or unmic or unmute and share out. What is a big takeaway that you notice from this chart? Are you noticing this section? Okay, greater access to higher language models. Right, we want to find those higher language models, and where will we find those? As we look at this frequency of rare words in printed text, television, and speech, and this comes out of a letters module that you might have participated in. I know one of the things that really speaks to me is look at the rare words per 1,000. In children's books, they have 30 for every 1,000 versus on what they would see on TV. They might have, even Mr. Rogers or Sesame Street would only have 2 words, or a primetime children's show only have 20. So, right, Miriam, media is slim on rare words, and the only place where they're higher is that text that's geared right towards us educated adults. But really think about the power in some of those really strong read alouds that you could leverage to build that vocabulary as well as build that background knowledge. When you select a book, I'm going to go back to those musts that Dr. Lakeisha Johnson shared with us to, find those books that have those multi-cultural diverse characters, so children can see no matter what the child, they should be able to see themselves in the books they read. And then think about those unique vocabulary and those tier 2 words. If you're not familiar with tier 2 words, we have a resource. Our patent literacy team has a resource hub website with some quick picks and some snippets that are short little 10-15 minute videos that would explain that tier 2 words. So I'll stick that link to that snippet in the chat for you in a minute. Then think about the story grammar components. Those books should have those identified characters, settings, events, and resolutions, and find those books that should be 10 minutes or less. So thinking about that. And then how do you implement? So what are some of the things that you want to consider as you start to implement? What are those moves? These are the teacher moves as you are thinking about your read aloud. You want to use that peer sequence. And what that peer sequence means, it's a fundamental element of dialogic reading, and it's the prompts that you would use while reading with your class. So you would plan those several different reads of the text so that you can scaffold the students through the different layers of the text. And so you would give them prompts about saying something about the book, use that formative assessment to evaluate their response, and then teach into that to expand their response, but either by rephrasing or adding information to it. And then have them repeat the prompt so that they've learned from that expansion. And so then in even thinking about different questioning you can do, the research recommends the mnemonic crowd to stand for the 5 recommended prompts that are resources for your read aloud. So as you plan your read aloud, you want to start with those completion prompts where you would leave a blank at the end of a sentence and get the child to fill it in. Typically, they're used in books with rhyme or books with repetitive phrases. And they allow the children an opportunity to provide some information about the structure of language that's critical to some later reading. Those recall prompts are questions about what has happened in a book that the child has already read. Recall prompts work for nearly everything except for alphabet books. For example, let me just use the story of the mitten. What was it that the little boy wanted his grandmother to make? Might be a recall prompt you could use for that. And then thinking about open-ended prompts. These are prompts that focus on the pictures in the books. They work well for best for books that have rich, detailed illustrations. You know, and that's where I would go back and think about visual, you know, I think even as I think about the story of the mitten, I can visualize the rich, detailed illustrations that are in that text. Those WH prompts, these are prompts that usually begin with that who, what, where, when, why, and how questions. For example, who were the different animals that climbed into the mitten? And then those distancing prompts are prompts that ask children to relate to the pictures in the book that they are reading, to experience or experiences outside the book. For example, you might want to say for the, again, using the mitten as an illustration, remember when we were hiking in the woods, what animals did we see? And think about that. So we've gone over what some of those crowd prompts are. So what Sherry's going to do is share a book that she utilized in her classroom and tell us how she implemented crowd in that opportunity. So take it away, Sherry.
Good evening. So I used the book I Am Perfectly Designed by Kamaro Brown. And one of the things I did when selecting my book, I went through Maya's Must. I wanted to make sure the book was multicultural and diverse. It had diverse characters. It had to have unique vocabulary, something catchy for my students. It also identified the grammar components throughout the book. The book had to be less than 10 minutes. As Sherry stated before, I teach emotional support. So it had to keep their attention for only 10 minutes. And it had to be engaging. The dialogical read, it was student focused also. I showed my students first the cover of the book and I paired them into twos and we did a talk and turn. For only 2 minutes, that gave them 1 minute apiece. I asked the students, what do you think the book would be about? So once one of the students responded was, I think the book is going to be about a father and a son watching people in the park. Another response was a father and a son eating in the park. Then after the talk and turn, then I introduced the vocabulary perfectly. What does that mean? Means as good as it gets. Design made as planned. Once I did that, I went through the book and then I went through those prompts. So next slide.
Oops. Sorry, Sherry.
It's okay.
There you go.
So I started with those completion prompts. I am perfectly designed can be first you say, first there was dad, the students will respond and say, and then there was me. Then I will say to my students, I am, and the students will say perfectly designed. This is something that was read throughout the book over and over again. Next slide. Then, as we do our recall, I would tell the students, can you tell me what costumes dad and son wore for Halloween? As they looked through the pictures and had the visuals, their response would have been waffle and syrup. Where is the setting? Now, when we first looked at the book, the setting was the fall because, of course, we had costumes on. Then one of the students noticed that on the same page, it was split. So we had went from fall to spring. So that is one thing that they noticed by looking at the pictures inside the book. Next slide. Then the open-ended. One thing I did, I showed the students the picture. It was the picture of the dad and son having a picnic. I showed them the picture and I asked them, can you tell me what's happening in the picture? The students, it was many things happening in the picture. One of the students said they were having a picnic. The other student said, Miss Wilson, they are just watching people walk away. Then the other student told me they're hooking, they're supposed to be in school. So they had multiple things, and that's why it is open-ended. Next slide. So my WH prompts, I asked them, what will the son remember? They told me the son will remember that all the walks in park they did, all the things they did, going to the market, holding hands, playing balls. Who was the story? Who was the characters in the story? The father and the son. But when we viewed the story the second time, like Sherry said, there were a market vendor inside the story. There were many people in the story. It was the lady walking. So there were many characters in the story. Where did the story take place? It took place at the house, at the park, on the way to school. So it was multiple things and places that the story took place. Next slide. Now my distancing. So like maybe 3 weeks ago, my students actually went to the Learcore Center to watch the basketball game, girls basketball game, Temple. So I reminded the students of the walk to the Learcore Center. I asked the students, what did they see? What did you see during your walk? And I was amazed how many of my students only saw one side of 12th Street and they never even walked towards Broad Street. So they were amazed of all the vendors that we have over there. They were amazed at the Temple Center. Oh, Miss Wilson, that's where you get your Chick-fil-A from. So they were really amazed at all the things. Then I asked them, what do you see when you're walking with your mom and dad? Or for my students, some have mom and mom or dad and dad. I asked them, what do you see? I wanted to make it universal, and I just didn't want to stick with just mom and mom, because you know in today's society, we have, or just mom and dad, because we have a mom and we have a dad and dad inside of my classroom. So I wanted to make sure everybody is comfortable with this. Next slide.
Yep, getting there.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
All right. And that was the book I could present it. I Am Perfectly Designed. So one of the things I did with implementing dialogical reading is it's very engaging. You can stop and you can start. And the students are excited when I do these readings, and we can step outside, if I can say that, the curriculum and pick something. And because I have social and emotional learning, it's one of those, I always try to pick those books. In this book, my students could see them. They could identify the diversity of the characters, and they was able to see themselves inside of this story. And that was so important.
All right. Is there anything else you want to share, Sherry? As far as like how has it changed your practice since implementing dialogic reading?
So for me, my students are more engaged and they're not like really antsy. They will actually sit, they get excited to pair up and they're excited. And one thing they do, we always go with an I see. So that's what they started with. I see the little boy in the park with the dad and stuff like that. So they get excited when I pop up a book because they never know what's going to pop up during my week.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. So as you see, our little 15-minute presentation went a little longer, and we do apologize for that. But if you even want to dig deeper, on the Padlet there in the session 2, we will put the handout. I put a handout. It's a little bookmark with the peer and the crowd prompts, and then just a little reminder of what those prompts look like. Little bookmarks that you can use for a resource. So I put those in the chat box, but I'll also post them to the Padlet, as well as some of the slides that we looked at this evening. But there are some really nice resources on the Padlet to even go deeper. And so that moves us into our professional sharing. And during that time, we're going to just go into some breakout rooms. Heather will be assigning us breakout rooms in a second. And during that time, just take that time to have the collegial conversation that we never really get to have about those diverse children's literatures selections that you're utilizing in your classroom. And don't forget to share some of that information that you might have collected. I know what I did for my book is printed off that information sheet from the Padlet to help me organize my thoughts. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop share. Okay. And then go ahead, Heather, do you want to?
Sure. I just wanted to mention that just in case somebody did not print that out, or maybe came in a smidge later and missed the Padlet, I just popped that back in. So it's in the second column under information sharing template. If that's something that, like I said, if you didn't get a chance to print it out and you, just want to be able to talk through it, you can pull it up on the Padlet at this time. So I've created 5 breakout rooms, so there should be 6 or 7 of you per room, and we will be popping in to kind of see how your conversations are going. Okay.